Good afternoon, and thank you for joining INSA today for Wednesday Wisdom with the Honorable Ellen McCarthy. I would now like to introduce INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual speaker series in the form of Wednesday Wisdom. I trust that everyone is healthy and sane all at the same time today. I'm delighted that INSA's good friend, the Honorable Ellen McCarthy, and her colleague, Ben Brake from State INR, are able to join us this afternoon for a conversation. A couple of things I wanted to go over, some housekeeping items. Please look at the right-hand side of your computer screen. There's a box there for you to submit questions. I would encourage you to include your name and your corresponding organization. We hope to get to some of your questions a little later in the program this afternoon. And I also wanted to mention that we have over 650 individuals registered for this virtual forum, many from the press, so this is an on-the-record event. Events like this afternoon's would not be possible without our sponsors. And today's sponsor is Guidehouse. Representing Guidehouse today and here to introduce our panelist is Alison Carter. Alison is the Director, National Security Segments at Guidehouse. Alison, over to you for introduction of our panelist.
Thank you, Suzanne. Guidehouse is passionate about the work we do with the intelligence community to help our clients tackle their most complex challenges. Staying connected during these uncertain times is critical, and I feel fortunate to be able to participate in this program to provide information and collaborate across the community. Thank you to INSA for putting this series together and for giving me a reason to change out of PJs today. We're honored to have two representatives from the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, which is the oldest civilian agency in the intelligence community. This year actually marks INR's 75th anniversary. INR's primary mission is to provide all source intelligence and analysis to support US diplomats. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Ellen McCarthy is the Assistant Secretary of State for INR. Previously, she served as President of Nobilis NSP and has held senior leadership roles at NGA, DoD, and the US Coast Guard, and the Office of Naval Intelligence. Notably, she served as president of INSA from 2009 to 2012. Benjamin Brake is the director of the Office of Cyber Affairs at INR. Prior to joining INR, he worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the US Senate Office of the Legislative Council. Welcome, Ellen and Ben. I'm looking forward to what promises to be a lively conversation. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Allison, and thank you to Guidehouse. So I want to go ahead and get just this first question out on the table. We're all working in very unusual circumstances that none of us could have envisioned. So I personally have been working for the past 5 weeks from what I refer to as my cloffice. It's actually my closet that has been turned into an office. Fortunately, it has a window so I can look outside. But Ben, Ellen, where do we find you all on this sunny afternoon?
Hello, Suzanne. This is my office, but my kids have taken over my office. So before we actually came on the screen, I proceeded to pull all the junk that was sitting on top of the desks and move them outside. I'm so glad they're outside the field of view.
We appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
As for me, Suzanne, thank you for having me. But I'm here in DC calling in from a converted nursery turned into study. The quietest room in our house was the nursery, and now it's our study. And thank you again for having us on today.
Well, we appreciate your creativity so that you could join us. So Ellen, this first question is for you. I think a lot of us on so many different levels want to know what the world is going to look like when we eventually and hopefully transition into a post-pandemic type environment. What does it look like for INR?
Suzanne, so I actually think, so right now, INR is actually doing a tremendous job dealing with this virus. I mean, I will tell you that we were prepared. We had a plan for moving analysts out of our spaces. Those analysts who are still working in our spaces are safe. And as a result, production has really, I mean, we've been doing just a tremendous job in terms of supporting the secretary and supporting the rest of the state. So I'm very proud of where we are. I actually think that there is going to be a shiny side to all this. There's a silver lining to this COVID cloud in terms of the things that are going to come out of all of this. So, you know, more of a focus on areas that INR is already focused on right now. So it's not just traditional threats like terrorism and kinetic threats, but it's things like some of the things that Ben is going to talk about. It's emerging technology and supply chain, and you know, supply chain and where are we getting our pharmaceuticals? Where are we getting our medical equipment? And so, you know, these are areas that INR always cared about, but now with the rest of the IC focusing on these areas, we're going to just be so much better. I think it's open source. I think we're going to be seeing INR has already been taking advantage of open source and producing more items at a level that our policymakers can use. So I think that's going to be a positive that comes out of this virus. I actually think looking at resources and how the IC expends resources. I think they were already doing this with the shift in the national security strategy. But as I think we look at things like environment, pandemics, health, I mean, you're going to see more of an investment across the IC in those areas. And lastly, the silver lining in all of this, and it's not really a silver lining, but I think the IC's focus on disinformation. And, you know, just the fact that there have been so many countries that have already, you know, Russia is the king of disinformation. China is getting even more aggressive. This is an area that INR has put tremendous focus. We work incredibly closely with the Global Engagement Center and our PAO there at state. But to get the rest of the IC focusing resources against this, these are areas where we're just going to get better. So thank you for your question.
So Ben, we had a chance to talk a couple of times before today's program. And, you know, we talked a bit about China. It's been a popular country in the news lately. And experts have indicated that China was going to win this US cyber China war. But now, you know, with the COVID epidemic and the global economy, what opportunities do you think this provides for the global tech environment in a post-COVID life?
Thanks, Suzanne, and that's a great question with a lot of uncertainty to it. You know, predicting the impact and development of emerging technologies, you know, China and elsewhere before this moment was incredibly difficult. There's so many uncertainties involved in it. You know, and the COVID is adding new new variable with broad implications. You know, what we could expect before this moment was that some of these new technologies could lead to large displaced labor populations whose routine labor tasks have been automated, and therefore we have now a displaced labor force. We have AI-enabled decision-making that could entrench biases and aggravate inequality that was already entrenched in a vulnerable economy. And so this is going to be true when we emerge from this, because this was true before. But I think the economic and social political realities of what these countries will be facing will have changed too. And it's something we'll just have to be continually mindful of. You know, a lot's going to change over the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, obviously. And we're taking steps now to be postured when we're on the other side of this. And I think, as Ellen already suggested, you know, broadening our open source collection efforts is going to be key to that. You know, looking at questions of industrial policy and technology acquisition. This is going to be key to monitoring trends and where developments may end up, and bringing on an expanded cadre of scientists and broadening our ties to academia and industry is going to be key to that.
Great. So, Ellen, we talked during our prep call and this morning a little bit about how lean your team is there at INR. And I was hoping you could tell us how you all are operating right now during the pandemic. You often have said that INR does less with, or does more with less, and would be happy to hear you or Ben kind of expand on your workforce.
So Suzanne, you know, before I get into answering your question, I actually want to offer, there's a reason to celebrate today. There's lots of reasons to celebrate today. We're your first Wednesday Wisdom event, but today is National Administrative Assistant Day. Today is Earth Day. Today is the 15th anniversary of the Office of the DNI. And I think the biggest, most epic event today is that it is Admiral Bob Sharp's wedding anniversary. And I think all of us need to raise a toast to Admiral Sharp and congratulate him on his wedding anniversary. You're probably wondering why I'm going here in terms of answering your question, but it's because INR is incredibly lean. I mean, we're the smallest intel organization in the IC, or one of the smallest. I think we're in there with Treasury and Energy, but we pack a big punch with very few resources. And you know, that's something I'm actually incredibly proud of. And so you wonder, how can we pack a big punch with such incredible resources, such few resources? And I think it's because it's our workforce is incredibly expert at what they do. You know, on average, the employee at INR has 14 years experience. They have multiple degrees. They speak multiple languages. And most importantly, of all the other intelligence organizations, and they all provide support to policy to include NGA, it's INR that is completely integrated with our policy-making community, with the diplomatic community. And so with those years of experience and with those relationships, they truly understand what the needs of the policymaker are. And they're really good at what they do. They know when to deliver the intelligence, what kind of intelligence is needed, but they're also experts in the IC. And so they're very good at leveraging other agencies to get the collections that we need or get to the support we need. We can't possibly be the only agency to produce intelligence for the diplomatic corps. So we're very good at leveraging others and providing the support that we do. And I'll tell you, my first when I did my office calls 15 months ago, and I met with all of my bosses inside and outside the building, you know, what I heard was, you know, we are for the most part very happy with the support that we get from your analysts and your operators within INR. I actually thought my job was going to be easy peasy, you know, but then I met with the secretary and he said, yes, I'm happy with what you do, but I want you to do more. I want you to do more on areas like China. I want you to push intelligence outside this building. I want to see what you do in areas outside Maine State. So we're small, we're lean and we're mean, but that doesn't mean we don't have areas to grow.
Great. So thanks for those insights. This is a question, actually, I'll start with Ben and maybe you all can both take a turn. But this is from Sarah Dalby at DOD. She submitted the question actually before the event, and I see some questions already rolling in. So keep those coming in, and we will try to get to some of those. But how has your leadership style changed or been most effective when, you know, in a SCIF world, folks are not really accustomed to working remotely and in this environment? How has your leadership style made an impact on your workforce? I'll start with you, Ben, and kind of get your perspective. I think a lot of folks are looking to how to lead during this extremely unusual time.
Sure, it's a great question, and it's funny you ask because I actually assumed a leadership role on pretty much the day we started maximizing social distancing. It was also the Ides of March, inauspiciously. But I think the key to our success so far has been flexibility, and everyone turning to new and other resources that perhaps our time in a SCIF didn't allow us time to consider. You know, I think a lot of the questions that are coming up with respect to emerging technologies are going to be answered in the traditional ways that the intelligence community collected information. You know, looking at an adversary's defense industrial base or classified military programs. But, you know, a lot of these breakthroughs are going to happen in the private sector, in applied R&D, for commercial applications. So these are things we can think about and ponder and consider and investigate on open source systems. So Ellen's been a tremendous advocate for us doing more outside of the SCIF and doing more with the research that's freely available. And then obviously when we do head into the State Department, turning that information into products that our policymakers can use, but even pushing products from outside the perimeter in the new platforms that Ellen's flagshipped. So flexibility has been key, I think, so far. But my experience is relatively junior. So
Ellen, I've worked for you before, and I'm familiar with your strengths in leadership, but how would you say they have transitioned or changed during this period of time?
You know, I think again, when I came to state, unlike some of the other places I've been, it was an Intel element that was providing tremendous support. I'll never forget that when I was doing some of my familiarization talks, I had somebody say, that you could not do anything and INR will be just fine. And because we'll continue to do what we've done for the last, 75 years and do it very well. And so that was a very unique place to be when you're coming into this already high performing organization. And so how do you influence? How do you keep people motivated? And so really, it was more about, coming into this high performing group and figuring out how to keep people going, or where are areas that we can introduce new capabilities. And so, it was very much a stretch for me in some regards. And I was able to bring in some of my background in resources and policy. And to Ben's point, look at, we are lean and mean, but that doesn't mean we don't have areas to grow. And so, diving into some of the areas that maybe some of my predecessors hadn't dived into as much, my understanding of the budget, my understanding of requirements and acquisitions, and then bringing that, discussion to the table at INR. And I'll say that the one thing I found is that INR has tremendous analysts, they have tremendous operators, but we haven't had a lot of people who spend a lot of time doing the program planning and budgeting execution process, working with the ODNI and the National Intelligence Program. So I brought that, and I'm working with others to introduce those concepts so that we can better leverage the National Intelligence Program to bring on the capabilities we need.
Well, your team is certainly fortunate to have you as a leader. So this next question is for you, Ben. It's from Rhonda Shrink, who is with USGIF. And she asks what cutting edge tools, technologies, and processes are on the horizon, and how can the IC leverage those? And how are you all at INR leveraging them?
So those are big questions, and it speaks to two different aspects of our work. I think part of that is how do we gather and process information in using new technologies, and then also how do we study and examine future technologies that might have implications for U.S. interest. So to address the first one, obviously with respect to a new emphasis, particularly in this environment, on open source information, obviously an ability to collect and process massive amounts of data is going to be incredibly important for us to make sense of the mountains of data that is out there. But that being said, it's going to require a human in the loop, and I think INR really brings that sort of broad subject matter expertise to bear here. In putting together lots of data sets, it's very appealing to bring it all together, and you can have really visually stunning graphics drawing information out of that, but that might not be knowledge, because different information, the data sets are collected differently. And so I think bringing the INR analysts to bear on a lot of these data sets and bring that human in the loop on the big data analysis is going to be really important going forward. And then as far as other technologies, it's a difficult question that we're faced with as strategic analysts. We're constantly asked what to care about, and I think there's a growing list from the National Defense Strategy, National Security Council, National Security Strategy, the PhRMA reform, Department of Commerce has a list of emerging technologies. I think all of them would be relatively obvious to anyone paying attention. Artificial intelligence, position navigation technology, quantum, and these sorts of things. But the question that we need to be focused on is not just the what, but the when to care about them and the why. A perfect parallel to our current times is if you go back to the 2008 National Intelligence Council Global Trends Report, right in there, pre-2025 is the scenario in which there is a novel, highly transmissible, virulent human respiratory illness that emerges and without proper mitigation becomes a pandemic. Our IC scientists were on it. They could tell us the what. The when is the challenging part, and I think with a lot of emerging technologies, that is going to be a key to our analysis, is the when to care about it. Is this a 1 to 3 year commercially viable technology? Is this a 3 to 5, or is this a 5 to maybe never? And having that kind of cadre of analysts on board is going to be really key to identifying when and which technologies to care about, and then also the why, because it's also there are externalities from that can be relatively unexpected. And to bring it back to the 2008 NIE report, you know, there are plenty of other whys to care about other than the virus itself, to include supply chain issues and global competition over PPE and other infrastructure that's necessary to properly fight. So that's what's going to be key, not just the which technologies, but the when to care about them and the why beyond the obvious.
And probably having the appropriately skilled workforce to embrace those technologies as well would be an important component of that.
That's absolutely right. So I think when you look at that list of technologies to care about, you know, it's going to raise questions of obviously what are the national security implications of some of these things, but also economic competitiveness and familiarity with market forces, socio-political implications. So some experience in the field. I think INR has a lot of these types of analysts, and more of those would be critical to fully understanding how these issues may play out.
Great, thank you. So Ben, I'm going to let you take a deep breath, and I'm going to have Ellen take one for the team this time around, but keep the questions coming in. Ellen, Bill Gertz with the Washington Times wants to know what INR's view is of the origin of the coronavirus behind COVID-19.
You know, I'll tell you, we've spent, you know, a lot of time looking at this. In fact, we have one of the community's foremost epidemiologists on the INR team, Dr. Adrian Kane, who has been spending hundreds of hours working on this. And I'll tell you that at this point, it is our perspective that scientists from around the world have examined the coronavirus and the genetic sequences of the coronavirus, which caused or which led to COVID-19. At this point, from what Adrian has told me and others, there's been no evidence that it has been genetically engineered or in any way manipulated. We don't know where the zero patient is or where it originated. We don't know now. We may never know, and we don't know where it was contracted. But what we do know is that public health experts for a long time have been looking at this, have been looking at the concept of potential transmission of viruses from animals to humans. And for years, they've actually described precisely the scenario that we're living in today. But at this point, this is what we do. Whether it originated in a wet market or whether it originated in a lab, we don't have that data yet.
So that was a challenging question. I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit for both of you all. I have a question here from Nicole Gibson at Guidehouse, our sponsor today, and she wants to know, what are you all doing to stay sane during this unprecedented time? Ben, I'll go with you first. Or are you? I mean, first of all.
It's hard. I don't know if a self-evaluation would be a fair one. Doing our best. You know, the remote learning for small children on top of you know, managing a team working remotely and a new and evolving environment is obviously a challenge. But you know, going into Main State like I did today and feeling like you know, systems are operating as in the past is kind of a nice escape. But otherwise, staying sane through managing a routine with remote learning for the kids, and then doing as much remote learning as I can throughout the day. That's what routines is my salvation.
So Ellen, are you staying sane? And if so, how?
You know, I am staying sane. But, you know, I have a glass of wine or two every night. That helps a lot. But I'll tell you that the role of diplomacy and INR support to diplomacy is not, you know, has not gone away as a result of the virus. So we're as busy as ever. In fact, potentially we may be even more busy. So it's not only managing, you know, a workforce that is outside the building, but it's supporting the real requirements that we're still getting. You know, Secretary Pompeo is an avid consumer of intelligence. And so, you know, his expectations are that we're going to keep supporting what he needs to do. You know, our folks around the world are still doing what they're doing. They still need the analysis. And so, you know, that actually in some way being able to focus on the mission and support to the mission provides it's a great sort of fallback. So, you know, we're not sitting and watching the news all day long, which I think would drive you crazy if you did that. We're still very much focused on intelligence support to the mission.
So the questions are coming in. This one is from Babs Doherty with Preferred Systems Solution. This is for you, first off, Ben. With all the changes in technology and intelligence analysis, how do you see the workforce changes that are required to support the mission?
Sure, and I think it'll at risk of repeating myself, I think it will involve you know, relying on INR's strengths and building on those. And I think what INR's strengths are broadly experienced, widely traveled, widely read, with advanced degrees, looking at some of these new and emerging challenges. You know, we've often, as a bureau, relied on science fellowship programs like the Jefferson Science Fellowship Program, the AAAS Fellowship Program, but also, you know, permanent cadre of career civil servants coming out of, you know, highly expert fields. And so I think, you know, building from that, building from our strengths and drawing in from more subfields to build out the cadre of the types of analysts that we have on hand to answer the day-to-day questions that we're constantly faced with and no doubt will be faced with in the future is the right way to go. So I think drawing from the pools of resources that INR traditionally has will serve us well.
Can I add to that?
You absolutely can.
Okay. You know, one of the things that absolutely surprised me when I came to INR is how different intelligence support is to diplomacy than it is to defense and law enforcement. It really is different. And it's because diplomacy is involved in a scope of activities that is so much broader than I ever possibly imagined. So the INR is a small microcosm of state. We're organized just like state. So if there's a cyber bureau, you know, Ben runs the office that is running cyber intelligence. So for the longest time, you know, we've had to bring in people who had unique skill sets, you know, who look a little different than potentially some of the other folks who work at other agencies. And so that's where we're very adept at, you know, being very creative in terms of bringing in people who are looking at things that at areas that may not, you know, be pockets of expertise across the IC. I'm totally forgotten where I was going with all of this. It was absolutely brilliant, but I guess what I was trying to say is that one of our challenges is this. So intelligence used to be, I believe, one of the main data streams that the foreign policymaker, the diplomat, used to make policy or implement policy. I'm not so sure that happens as much today. There's so much data that your average diplomat uses to make decisions upon which intelligence is just one stream. It used to be the biggest stream, but I'm not sure it necessarily is today. They have so much data that they use to make their decisions, which means from the INR side and from the intel community side, we are constantly looking at ways that we can make intelligence provide more value. You know, how can we display the intelligence? What are the types of capabilities that we may provide that'll help the policymaker assess how a policy is actually going? Is it meeting the objectives that it was actually set out to make? Are there other ways to get intelligence to the policymaker? You know, one of our challenges, which is not unique, but you know, most of our clients work at the secret level and lower, but you know, we still operate at the highest classification level. So, you know, how can we produce value-added intelligence that will actually help the policy may make their decisions or implement their decisions? Because in the absence of that, they're going to use other sources of data, and it's not always accurate. So that's one of our challenges.
Can I have a quick two-finger, that triggered a thought that I had that I didn't mention. You know, I think one of the one of the new issues that we're being asked to tackle is, how might political systems come under direct threat from sort of technology-enabled foreign influence threats to elections, for example. Elections is not something that we historically had considered as an issue, but we do now. And then you need to integrate that with an awareness and understanding of some of the sort of the technologies available to enable those foreign influence operations. And so, and I think, historically we tended to think of elections in terms of cycles and seasons, but for now, for the department, which operates globally, this is an evergreen issue for us, really. And to fully understand the implications of some of these technologies, it's helpful to have the type of analysts that INR has who understand the media environment in a particular country, access to internet, other ways in which information travels. And this is true for elections and the implications they have for regional stability, but it's going to be true for distributed ledger technologies and new financial instruments that might come to bear in new and emerging markets. So that's something else that INR's sort of proximity to policymakers is really helpful, but also familiarity with the world and the globe is really helpful.
Well, you mentioned your analysts, and I think many of us are very grateful to the work that they're doing for our country right now. So I hope a lot of your team is tuning in. I have a question here, and it's from Martin Matashek from Politico, who asks, what major developments has INR observed in the cyber domain during the COVID-19 pandemic? Are nation states and hackers being more aggressive or less?
So I'll go forward with that one. I mean,
okay.
I'll take the first swing at it. Ellen, please chime in. But I think this is obviously an environment in which many actors are able and have an interest in using this moment to undermine either other states, advance their own strategic interests, undermine the credibility of their own governments, and in some cases pursue activities as profit-seeking. So certainly, by all accounts that we see from information security companies that have broad global telemetry, they're seeing all of this activity. And with respect to cyber-enabled activities, some of that could include disinformation campaigns that Ellen referred to in the morning, earlier in this discussion. And again, some of these actors may be creating the content. Sometimes they might be amplifying domestic content. There's so many motivated parties seeking to take advantage of this that it's hard to single out any particular one. But I will say a challenge that we face, that we've always faced in cyber, is that is the attribution question. We always try to bring a rather rigorous framework to this problem, and I just want everyone to bear that in mind, that whether it's cyber or disinformation, you have to look at the tradecrafts, the infrastructure, the intent, and also external sources where they're available to build together an understanding of who the actors are and what their intents are.
And to feed off what Ben said, and really to put more focus on this disinformation piece, as I indicated earlier, you have the usual suspects, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, but there's a real opportunity for others to learn. And so in that regard, the playing field is getting much broader, and it's not always big nation states. It gets to the attribution piece that Ben was talking about, so it gets harder and harder. Again, being a silver lining kind of gal, I mean, I think this has been very obvious with the virus. The fact that looking at China as an example, very early on, there was an incredible opportunity for the party and their whole reason for being to come under incredible suspicion within their own country. And yet in very short order, they've been able to turn this all around. And so the disinformation campaign, is highly effective. And so, we need to be on top of this. The intelligence community needs to be on top of this to ensure that the right message is getting out.
Great. So this next question is from Jay Pendarvis, and he asks, considering the intelligence community on conducting business within SCIFT environments and the new normal of operations created in our post-COVID community, is the leadership considering leveraging unclassified development environments as a viable option, which I think is a really interesting question. It's something the community has been talking about, but now with the pandemic, we're positioned much differently to make that decision.
So Suzanne,
Ellen,
I love
see
your
you.
first. Yeah, I'm ready for it because
Okay.
I mean your first question really it highlighted some of the 4 things that actually I think we're going to see the biggest changes in, and I mean I think really the communities embracing the open source, publicly available information is going to get pushed forward. We've been trying to do this for a long time, but there was a combination of tools and culture that has prevented us from going there. But I'll tell you that certainly within INR, we've been pushing production using publicly available information with great success. I mean, the feedback we're getting from our posts and from around the world is, please do more of this. And so I have to believe that this is actually going to motivate the rest of the IC to do the same thing. Plus, some of the data that we actually need, you know, so when you're looking at supply chain or you're looking at you know, quantum computing or AI, some of the best data we have actually resides in publicly available information. So, you know, this means that there's going to be absolutely a hunger to actually go outside the classified domain, the compartmented side of the house, and try and gain those insights. And that's not going to say that we don't still value compartmented sensitive information, but to the extent that we can focus our resources on areas where we have gaps in knowledge and really take advantage of what we understand from the open source, I really think that's going to be the bright side of all of this. And I definitely, you know, get the sense that that's where we're going to go.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, just to pile on to that, you know, and I want to link it back to your question about how I stay sane. I stay sane because I have an incredible team that has, you know, from day one to social distancing, been out there from their own homes, putting together fantastic unclassified reports that Ellen mentioned that are getting great feedback around the world, and you know, and here in DC, you know, because there is tremendous data out there. There are resources that we can leverage. Yeah, but there will also be tools to make better use of those. But right now, staying sane by people looking at where companies are, what they're pushing, and those are soon going to be able to answer questions that we have of when might a country get from a basic R&D on a new technology to applied R&D to a commercially viable product to market to having strategic advantage in a particular sector. So, you know, a lot of that information is out there. My team is helping keep me sane by looking at that information, and I think going forward we'll definitely have to keep doing so.
Great. So I need to preface the next question with everyone has written in so far and to say thank you. They say thank you and then they pose their questions. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that how much everybody appreciates you all getting up your precious time this afternoon to share with us. But Ben, this next question is from Robert Milford. He wants to know how you see INR in the future, leveraging the growth in commercial imagery, especially with the disruption being created by the exponential increase in commercial imagery providers and the market that is rapidly evolving. So
I'm going to do the cheeky thing and actually pass it over to my assistant secretary, who you know, former NGA, who I think can speak more to what can be leveraged via imagery than I ever could hope for. So Ellen, I hope you don't mind if I give that over to you.
Of course not, Ben. And I know Robert Milford. I'm going to get you Robert Milford. But actually, I love this question because it does highlight one of the capabilities that INR has. So, you know, for those of you who may not be as familiar with INR, the geographer of the State Department actually resides within INR. And so, you know, and I sort of alluded to this earlier. Not only do we have the geographer of the United States, but INR could not do what it does without the rest of the IC. We may be the oldest all-source intelligence organization, you know, relative to CIA and DIA, but we couldn't do our jobs without the rest of the IC, and that certainly includes NGA and access to commercial imagery. I highlighted that some of the challenges we have is being able to get information and intelligence out at the level that we can, and this is where, you know, commercial imagery is just an incredibly valuable resource. And so I'll tell you, we have great We have a great partnership with NGA. I actually congratulated Admiral Sharp for his wedding anniversary today. I think that shows you how close we really are in terms of them supporting our requirements for imagery and mapping. Now, that being said, you know, as we look out into the future, a future that I have laid out in my strategy, INR 2025, one of the areas that we need to make an investment is in our just enterprise geospatial capability. And so we're working very closely with NGA to bring into to update some of that foundational capability and to actually enhance what we already do to provide better visualization, better mapping to our diplomats here in DC and around the world. Thank you, Robert.
Great. So we have about 3.5 minutes, and I have a question here from Lee Ramsur asking about private sector support. And so one of my final questions was going to be put to both of you: what can the private sector do to help? And if you've got some remarks you want to slide in before I close, you can talk through that quickly and then provide us with some lasting impressions.
And you want to go first?
Public-private collaboration.
Okay, I can go first. Having spent some time in the private sector, you know, I intimated, Lee, that, you know, I think one of our challenges is, you know, how do we better integrate intelligence with the policymaker? You know, what are the tools that we could use? What are the things we haven't thought about? You know, I'll tell you that at INR, we still are very reliant on that human connection. You know, we put together about 500 briefing books a week. You know, that's changed with COVID. We've now moved to electronic capabilities. But, you know, what are the technologies? What are the tools that we can use that will help us? You know, I really want intelligence to continue to provide value. And again, I'm really concerned that if we don't do that, you know, our policymaker, actually, you know, the whole government they have access to open source data. They have access to all the tools and capabilities that reside in the private sector, but they're not always the best. And so, you know, what are those things that we can do? What are those things that we can use to ensure that intelligence is truly being incorporated into policymaking?
Great.
Briefly, I can improve upon that, but I will say, you know, most of our background on my team has been working with cyber issues and now moving into more and more emerging technology issues. But, you know, drawing from our experience with on cyber, there are great, tremendously knowledgeable private sector companies working on information security that have huge networks, huge client base that has exquisite information that can help us understand a challenge and an emerging threat. And that's gonna remain true for any new emerging technology. There are private sector actors out there doing tremendous market research that will inform our understanding of where trends are. And again, you know, a lot of what we need to know about emerging technologies will be in the things that you know, traditional IC sort of targets of collection. Going forward, a lot of that's going to be in the private sector, and a lot of that's going to be information available to other private sector actors that we can get through more cheaply through just close collaboration with private sector partners.
Well, it's clear from our conversation today, and I've heard you all both say it before, that INR definitely punches above its weight. Ellen, any closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, you know, well, first of all, Suzanne, thank you for this opportunity. You know, to talk a little bit more about INR. I really do think it's an extraordinary intelligence capability that's not, you know, that's not always well understood. You know, you talk about INR punching above its weight. You know, I'll tell you that one of the concerns I have, and maybe this is where the private sector can help, is how much longer can we punch above our weight? You know, I've been in the private sector long enough to know that, you know, when your resources are decreasing, but your requirements are increasing. And when, you know, fortunately, we're continuing to have an incredible impact. You know, we are the #1 producer of the President's Daily Brief per capita. So we are continuing to have tremendous impact. We're producing more, but with less resources, but that's just not a solid business model. So, anything the private sector can do to, talk us up and identify ways that we can become even more effective with finite resources, we'd be very grateful.
Great. Well, thank you to you both.
Yeah.
Just a couple of closing remarks on our end here at INSA. We're very grateful again to both Ben and Ellen for joining us this afternoon. And next Wednesday, we will have Sue Calway, Director of Analysis, joining us in the afternoon. And then the following Wednesday on May 4th, the Honorable Sue Gordon, who is one of INSA's Senior Intelligence Advisors. Again, these programs that we are going to be holding every Wednesday afternoon, and then also a Tuesday morning coffee program in which Kevin Miners is going to kick off for us on May 5th, wouldn't be possible without sponsors like Guidehouse. I would encourage you all to take a look at the survey. Again, this is a first for INSA. I'm so proud of my team who has not shied away from embracing new technologies and getting up to speed on how to deliver a webinar. And I think Ellen and Ben have set a really high bar for our next speakers. But we hope you all will consider tuning in future programming that we're offering here virtually, and continue to stay safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Bye, Ellen. Bye, Ben.
Bye.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.